Okay, part two. Let's talk about interacting with an external API. And an external API, as I said in the first part, API is just an acronym that means Application Programming Interface. And really all that means is it's a way for one computer to talk to another. And in our case, it's going to be our browser, our P5JS sketch, running on your laptop or your mobile phone or wherever that computer is running, talking to another computer on a web server somewhere to get some data that we can show on the page. So we're going to connect the browser to a server that's giving us some data and show that on the browser. So an API, as I said, just stands for Application Programming Interface, and really it's just how computers talk to each other on the web in our case. If you do any more programming in the future, you might come across this idea of API and API in lots of other cases, like if you're in Unity, there's an API in Unity to do graphics. You know, OpenGL is one very commonly used API. So API gets used in lots of different places, but what we're really interested in this demo is an API and a application programming interface between a browser and a web server. The first problem you'll come up against is finding an API to use. Like where are these APIs? How can I get them? Give me the API. And I've listed here a few directories of APIs, and I found the GitHub one was a good starting point. So if we have a look in there, this is just someone has made this list of publicly available APIs and a collective list of free APIs for use in software and web development. Now there's something that's a little bit tricky about when you want to use an API, and that is there are different kinds of web APIs. So we're specifically interested in one that we can use from a browser to talk to a web server. But there are also web APIs for one server to talk to another server. That's a slightly different case. So in our case, we want one that a browser can use. So anyway, if I click in here, I think there's some really fun ones here. Cat facts. I can get daily cat facts. Awesome. Pictures of cats and dogs, pictures of random foxes, and all sorts of different topics. Business, calendar, cloud, continuous integration, cryptocurrency, lots of cryptocurrency ones, date validation, development. And what you'll see in this list, it's got three columns on the right. So the first one, auth, second one, HTTPS, another acronym, and the third one, CAUSE, another acronym. There's so many acronyms in web development, it's crazy, but let's go through them. So this first one, cryptocurrency. Okay, so this is some kind of an exchange. Auth, it uses an API key. So that's sort of like a secret token, usually, that you add to your request. When you request the data from the server, you add your API key to that request in order to get the data. It's just so that they can guarantee that they only give it to people who've signed up for their service. And they can track the usage, and if you use too much, they can ask you to upgrade to a paid subscription or something like that. The second one, HTTPS, that just says whether the API is accessible on HTTPS as well as HTTP. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you look in the top here, this page that I'm on is HTTPS. And you will have also seen lots of pages that are just HTTP something something. And the difference between HTTPS and HTTP is that the S stands for secure. So an HTTPS page is encrypted between the browser and the server that it's requesting data from. So it's a good thing for us if the service supports HTTPS. And so like if you're on the web editor page, it is an HTTPS page, and there's a security setting in your browser that says I'm not going to allow any content into my page if I'm on an HTTPS page if that content comes from an HTTP page. I think there's some sort of a restriction there. You might get a warning or it might not work. I can't remember the details. The important thing is this HTTPS thing is good for us. I'll just go back there. So that's good. And then CORS. CORS is another security feature. It stands for Cross-Origin Request. What does CORS stand for? CORS acronym, web dev. Cross-origin resource sharing. Okay, so this is another security thing where your browser tries to protect you by saying, I'm only going to load stuff from another like scripts, JavaScript files, or data from another website if that website has told me it's safe for me to load that data. So if you don't have this feature, sometimes it's possible for a malicious website to like try and get data from your social media site or something like that, or try and log you in at your bank or something terrible like that. So this is quite an important security feature, and but the upshot is the server that we're getting the data from needs to say, yes, it's okay for other websites to take this data. The data is not sort of secure or sensitive in that way. So what we want here is basically we want ones that say yes. They will allow a CORS request. Most of these say unknown, and I know for a fact that some of them that say unknown will allow it, and the one that we're going to look at does. So, okay, so a bit of content there, but those are the things you're looking for. You're looking for one that allows authorization through some means, through an API key usually, that supports HTTPS, and ideally that allows this CORS. Well, you'll need it to support CORS from the browser. So if I just search on weather here, go down to the weather section, and weather is like the hello world of API examples. So I'm going to use one of these here. I'm going to use Open Weather Map. It uses an API key. It says no on HTTPS and unknown on CORS. Well, let's see how we go on that. Maybe if that one doesn't work, I might try using one of the other ones. Yes, yes, yes. Storm glass. Global marine weather from multiple sources. Oh, should I take a risk and just go with one I haven't looked at before? I'll stick with the one I was planning on, but I might come back to this if I run into problems with that one. Yeah, what I want to do basically is go to this this Open Weather Map page. I'll open it in a new tab. And when you go to any of these sites that offer an API, what you want to look for is a tab that says API or maybe developers. Sometimes it's up at the top here. Sometimes you've got to scroll down to the bottom and look through that footer. Somewhere there'll be a link to the API documentation. And many of them, they'll offer a free service, but there'll also be some sort of paid option. And that's usually like if you're doing, you're creating an app that's using this data and making lots and lots of requests, they'll ask that you pay a monthly subscription or something like that. Most APIs work that way. So usually you can find one that has a free version, which is good enough for most creative coding applications. And so here I've signed in. So I created an account on this page. And then when I sign in, I come to this page and I can click here and get my API key. So this is the secret that I'll be using in my sketch to connect to the data that this website offers. So probably after I finish this video, I'll come in and change this key to something else so that it's it's still a secret. But you should also be aware that if you're using JavaScript, it's pretty hard to keep a secret. So if anyone comes to your website, they can find out what your API key is by looking at the source code of your JavaScript file. Anyway, we've got that. Now, what I want to do is look at the, go into the API, and I just want to look at some of the examples. So let's see if we can get to the documentation. So I'm just going to do the simplest one, get the current weather data for one location, and I'll just get it for Brisbane, so I can look out the window and verify that the data that I'm getting looks correct. And basically, this is what I need. So I just need to put API openweathermap.org data 2.5 weather equals London. And somewhere in here, it should also tell me where I put that API key. It's got all this, it's got all of the information that we need, but I'm just looking for one specific thing. So let me just go back. Example of using an API key in an API call. So this is important. So you can see I've got this kind of, it's basically just a web address, but at the end I put an ampersand and then app ID equals, and then that secret key that is part of my API call. So that's what I just need to remember. App ID equals, and then the key. So I'll go back to here with the city name, and this is the example of what I need to call. So open that in a new tab, and this is just a regular web address. So if you post that ID into your browser, you'll get the same data. So what I want to do next is change this to Brisbane. Brisbane AU, I think, is Australia. And it's going to take away the app ID part. Invalid API key. Okay, so when I try to put in my city without the API key, I need to follow this link. So let's just take a look at that and see what it tells us. I'll just paste that part of the message in. And it just it's telling me basically that I didn't put that app ID part on the end of the request. So I go back to my API. I'll sign in here, sorry. Look at my API keys. Take my key there, copy that. And this says samples.openweathermap. It should just be api.openweathermap. Let's change this to api.openweathermap. Q equals Brisbane AU. Then I put ampersand app ID equals, and then that secret. And here we go. This is the temperature now in Brisbane. So it is indeed a little bit rainy today. The temperature is 294.2. That's strange. The pressure is this, the humidity is this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now this temperature is given in kelvins, which is like the sort of scientific way of measuring temperature. So we need to convert that to Celsius, but we can do that. So let's just now use that in the sketch. So this is a good way to test out, like, is my API key working? Like, if they've got this system where you can just request it through your browser, it makes it really easy. So like, if I wanted to change it to Melbourne instead, I can see that in Melbourne today, the weather is clear. It's clear sky. Darwin should be a little bit warmer because it's a lot further to the north. It's 303, so it's quite a bit warmer than here in Brisbane. All right, so let's just take Brisbane. And I'm going to go to my web editor, and I'm just going to set up some variables for the various parts of this. So let req for request equals, and then it's going to be that. And I'm just going to separate out the app ID into a different separate variable, so I can change it easily later if I need to change my app ID. So I'll just make that a string as well. And so in P5.js, we don't just type like here, or where was it? Here I can just type that data into the locations bar and get the data back. We need a way of doing that in P5.js, right? So I'll just go to the P5.js reference. And I want to look at the I/O section. And here what I want is, I think it's HTTP do. Let's see if that's the one. Yeah. Let's see. That was actually a pretty cool demo. That was getting earthquake data from the US. Like maybe if you've got a band that's got some kind of earthquake themed song, that could be fun to play around with. I think I can also just do load JSON with an HTML address. Yeah, so I think basically if I say load JSON for some URL, I'll be able to get the data like that. So let me try that. Let's see. I'm going to make a global variable, data, and I'm going to say, I'll put this in the preload so that it's guaranteed to have finished before we start drawing. Function preload data equals load JSON, and then it's going to be request plus app ID. And I'll just console log the data. Just to see that we're getting it. I closed it with a single quote when I had opened it with a double quote, so that's a problem. And look, I've got here in my console an object. And so I've got a coordinate in there, I've got some weather, I've got a main object, a wind object, a clouds object, system object, an ID and a name. So what does all this information mean? Well, if I go back to that page where I was just testing it out manually, you can see here that I've got the same things. I've got coordinate, longitude, latitude, weather, main. I wonder if no, it's just, so this is a format called JSON. It's just a way of describing data in text, but the advantage of it is very, very easy to interpret into JavaScript. So all of these can pretty much become JavaScript objects, and that's what we're seeing here in this. So like I've got this object which has inside it a coordinate, a weather, and then an array of weather. So let's actually get some of the data out of that. So if I go back to the API description page, this describes to me what is in that API response. So there's loads of stuff you could do with this. I'm just going to look at the temperature and yeah, and So I said at the start that the temperature by default is in kelvins, so it was 200 and something kelvins. Really, I want that to be in metric. So let me see. Let's search on metric. So here, if I put units equals metric into my API request, so again, when you look at these, you've probably seen this if you've ever done a search. You get like a question mark after the first part of the URL, and then you get like here, Q equals and then something, and then an ampersand, and then app ID in this case equals something. It'll be like something equals sign something, and then ampersand, something equals something else, ampersand, and so on. That's how you can pass data from your browser to the web server. It's called a query string because it started from search engines. So we can use this query string to pass some extra data to the API server. So I could say units equals metric ampersand. So you just use these ampersands to separate each element in the query string, and sort of like that's the key, like the setting, and that's the value for the setting. So if I reload this, we should see the temperature. Yeah, so temperature min 18, temperature max 23.3. So I'll go back to my p5.js and then add that into my query string, and units equals metric. Save that. And now, instead of just logging all of the data, let's actually figure out which part of that data has the temperature in it. So it's in this weather array. That's the rainy bit. This main bit has the temperature. So it's data.main.temp 20.96. So I've got my temperature. So I'm just gonna draw that to the screen. So text data.main.temp at width over 2, height over 2. And I'll set the text size to be a bit bigger, text size 100, and text align center. Okay, so the temperature in Brisbane is 20.96. Now, one last thing I think could be fun to do is allow some user input. So maybe we can put in different Australian cities and get the temperature at each one. So I'm going to make another DOM element. Let a text field, I'm going to say create input is that the right one for it? I always forget these. Yeah, Brisbane. Oh, and I don't want to do that on the preload. I want to do that after setup, after I create the canvas. So it goes below the canvas. Create element BR. So I'll put a break after that, and then create fetch. So I'm going to say text city and then let button fetch. So text city equals create an input for, and it has a default value of Brisbane, and then button fetch equals create the button, and then just let me check what we need to do to get the I want the button when the button is clicked, so create button, and then button.mouse pressed, and then I give it a function to execute. So when my button is pressed, button fetch.mouse pressed, I'm going to call a function called fetch data. Right, and that function is going to get whatever the name of the city the user has put in and fetch the data from that. And I'll just put another break after that so it's spaced out nicely. Okay. Something went wrong. It may be because I haven't defined this function yet, so I'm just going to say function fetch data. Just leave it as an empty function for now. There we go. So I just needed to define the function. So when we want to fetch the data, what I want to do is say let city equals text city.value. So whatever the value of that city in that city field is, in this case Brisbane, get that value, and then basically what I wanted to do is this part. Data equals load JSON request plus app ID. And I need to break my request up a little bit. So I'm just going to move these down inside the function. They don't need to be global variables anymore. And I'm just going to break this up a little bit so we can change the city. So it's, at the moment, Brisbane is hard-coded in there. So I'm just going to say I'm just going to put that first part as just that, like just the base of the URL. Then I'm going to say actually I'll go up to the end of this, like q equals. I'll just like end that string there, just where the city part is. So here when I get the city, I can get the city into that variable, and then I can say request equals that plus city plus that. And I'll just break this onto a new line to make it line up a bit better, and then the app ID just goes at the end. I should put the plus here. We'll be happier. And I don't want to do my preload in the here. What I actually want to do is just fetch the data by default. Oh, I'll do it. Actually, I'll do it. I'll do it here in setup. Just fetch it for the first time in setup. But here I need to be careful because this data will be undefined at first. So if I run it, I will get an error. Can't read property temp of undefined. That's because data and everything like that is undefined. So I need to say if data, if there is some data, only when we have data should we draw it to the screen. Data. So I should say data and data.main. So we have to have some data. It has to have this main part inside it, and it has to have .temp inside it. Okay, so I've got Brisbane's data, and if I change this, Brisbane's temperature, and if I change this to Melbourne fetch the data. It's 15 degrees in Melbourne. Sydney. Fetch. I don't know. Darwin. So there you go. That's an example of using an online API to get some data and then display it in our canvas. And like, there's loads more you can do. So, you know, you can get cat facts and put them into your sketch. Lots and lots and lots of different things to try. You know, look online for tutorials to help you with this process of understanding those API calls. I think the Coding Train has quite a good series on that. It can get complicated, but at least here you've seen the start of how to deal with that. Okay, that's pretty much the end of where I wanted to get to with this demo. In the first part, we looked at the DOM, the Document Object Model, and we've looked at external APIs in the second part. Really, for homework, just keep going with assignment 2, and good luck with your creative coding, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with in the assignments.